Welcome to In Their 20s, a podcast for people in their 20s. Today we spoke with Ezra Levine, who is the CEO of Collectible, a company that allows you to purchase shares in sports memorabilia and iconic trading cards. Collectible provides investment and ownership opportunities to sports fans, collectors, and investors of all income brackets. So let's jump in with Ezra to hear about his unique professional journey and his company, Collectible. So Ezra, we can get started. Again, really excited to speak with you today about Collectible and the company and its growth. But before we get started with that, I did see and read a little piece that you were in a while back that your days start really early. So your days start around 5 a.m. I'm curious if this was something that started when you were in your early 20s. Have you always woken up early, or was this a habit that you've recently developed?
If you ask my parents, they would say I was one of the best sleepers that they've ever seen. And I used to love sleeping late when I was in high school and college. What actually changed that for me, believe it or not, was when I was about 2 years out of college, I got a job as a trader on Wall Street. And the fund that I was at would trade a lot of commodity futures and currency futures, markets that run essentially on a 24/7 basis. And the principal of the fund that I was working at, I was his execution trader. So if I wasn't in the office, trades were not going to be completed and executed. So he really ingrained in me this, sort of show up early, stay late mentality. And honestly, that lifestyle almost became a lifestyle for me. I would love getting up early. I love the thought of being up, earlier than everyone else, that there was this quiet time, this quietude almost, where you could be focused and you could sort of get your head on straight, right, for the day. And I just love the feeling that I was up grinding earlier than other people were, that I felt like it gave me a little bit of a head start. Whether or not, that sort of was the case, I'm not sure. But for me, it sort of gave me a little bit of additional confidence. And sort of a little bit of a feeling like my day is off to a strong start. So I've stuck with that. I no longer work on Wall Street. I'm no longer a trader, but I still find myself, sort of setting my alarm. I'm up at 4:30, 5 o'clock every day. I usually find that the first 2 hours of my day oftentimes are some of the most productive, both from a work standpoint, where I can really focus on getting stuff done that oftentimes during the course of a regular work day, you just get pulled away. People call, people text, people email, you just get pulled away from things. Early in the morning, when everyone else is sleeping, that's a time for you to do focused, concentrated work. And, I love it. And honestly, if I don't have that time, there are times where I oversleep or I'm exhausted the night before, I was out late, and I feel as though my day is incomplete and sort of off to a scattered beginning if those first couple hours are not as early as I like them to be.
Love that, Ezra. That's that CEO mentality. Really love to hear it. And our listeners are going to enjoy that as well. So with that, I just love to pivot. We can dive into Collectible. This is a space that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. Fractionalization, the act of investing in sports memorabilia and iconic trading cards. I just want you to have the floor. How did this opportunity present itself to you? And what does Collectible do?
Sure. Yeah. So, if you look at fractionalization a little bit, right, I think that the easiest way for people to really understand it is think of a stock, right? A stock that's traded on the public markets. Take Facebook, right? Because that's a very common example. When you own a share of Facebook, that means you're a fractional owner of the business, right? When you own one share of Facebook, for $330, whatever it is today, you don't own the entire company, right? You're not on the board of directors. You're not Mark Zuckerberg. You're not the CEO. But you have a fractional ownership in the business. You have your pro rata share of the business, right? You, true are an owner, and you're an equity owner. We really took that same concept of people can't afford to own the entire thing, but people can afford to own fractions of it, right? They can afford to own bits of it. And we applied it to, a marketplace that we thought was really ripe for innovation, right? And that is the world of sports collectibles, really high-end, blue-chip, iconic sports collectibles. We identified a multi-billion-dollar industry that had not really witnessed or experienced innovation in quite some time, that was dealing in legacy systems and technologies and processes. And we thought that there was an opportunity to modernize it, to digitalize it in some capacity, to streamline it, to here's a common buzzword for you, to democratize it, right? To democratize it, and really to open it up to, hopefully hundreds of thousands, millions, multi-millions of participants, right? In the stock market, I think a lot of people, view the stock market as one of the most efficient pricing mechanisms that exists on earth, right? And why is it so efficient? Well, you have, millions upon millions of people who can express a view, right? And, when you look at a stock price, that's really just, sort of the aggregate consensus opinion for that particular company at that particular time, right? Nothing of that sort had existed in sports collectibles. So, to really kind of simplify what collectible does is we've created a stock market for sports collectibles. We've taken the most iconic, valuable, blue chip collectible items that previously were only able to be owned by really wealthy individuals in a really inefficient and cost-intensive way. And we've created a market, a real marketplace for it, where high value items can be broken down into shares. So now anyone over the age of 18, regardless of income brackets, can own and invest in some of the most iconic, rare, and relevant stuff there is.
I love this because it already is such a large industry, but it's only growing exponentially. So you're giving so many people, young people, a lot of people in their 20s, an opportunity to get a piece of this as it's continuing to grow. Because as you mentioned, there are right now, just within the sports industry, a lot of people at the top, only these people are allowed and able to purchase these expensive cards. So why not give everybody else an opportunity to have a piece of that and see the growth and become a part with that? So I really love the concept. It's really intriguing. So I've noticed a lot of times when speaking about the product, you've mentioned that collectible is a combination between passion and product. I'd love to hear in your own words what that means. And I think our listeners will really enjoy this as well.
Yeah. I mean, we say this all the time. I've been on the record. I'm almost sick of hearing myself say it. Right, this phrase "passion and profits," but it really is true. I think this is somewhat unique to the collectibles category. Right, so I'll start sort of macro here. Our strong view, right, is that collectibles, in the same way people think of, when they just think about, their portfolio or how to invest, right? I think a lot of people know about stocks and they probably know about bonds. They think about real estate. They're probably thinking now about cryptocurrencies, right? What people have not thought about are collectibles. And the reason why people have not thought about collectibles is because there's never been any way to sort of get exposure to them in any meaningful way, right? When you look at some of the data around collectibles, and we today exclusively focus on high-end sports collectibles, when you look at the data over long periods of time, there's a really compelling investing thesis, right? You've seen outperformance, both in real strong economic times and in weak economic times. We've seen the benefits of diversification, right? It provides a level of diversification for one's portfolio. We've seen that's not necessarily been correlated to the performance of other assets, right? So there's a real sort of profit story, right? So that's where the whole sort of profit parts of this come from, is that over long periods of time, people have made a lot of money in this industry, but only if you could afford to participate, right? That's been the whole barrier. Only if you can afford to participate at the high end of the industry, and only very few people have been able to do that, right? So you had this amazing marketplace that has produced really great returns, only for a very small amount of people. We say passion, right? Because passion, if you speak to a collector, and I speak to them all day long, but when you speak to collectors, there's a passion in their voice, unlike anything I've heard, about a lot of things. And generally speaking, people are just passionate about sports, passionate about their teams, passionate about their cities, passionate about their schools. Sports and culture, from our experience at least, represent some of the best, about the human condition, right? And so I think people in general are very passionate about sports, right? So really, that phrase "passion and profits" is you have an industry filled with passionate people and about sports, of which some people are passionate about, and you profits because there's been a lot of money made. It's just never been affordable to people of all income brackets before, and through Collectible, we're able to do that.
Of course. So thinking back about your own personal passion, when you really fell in love with sports collectibles, do you remember your first trading card, first sports memorabilia when you were a child? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I like a lot of kids growing up in the 90s, cards were a big thing. The cards were the kind of cool thing to be collecting and doing back then. So, I'd say a lot of my earliest interactions with some of my friends were sort of surrounding, collecting cards, trading cards. It was, a real popular thing to do. But I think like a lot of other kids, you sort of lost touch with trading cards. Honestly, I hadn't thought about trading cards or memorabilia in probably about 15 years. What actually brought me back into the market was my dad. My dad has been one of the biggest influences on my life, and he was always a collector. I always knew he was a collector. I didn't realize just how big of a collector he was. He went by an alias, right? Like a lot of collectors, in this industry, people are very private about their collections. They don't always like to reveal what they have. Some do, but a lot of them don't. And so my dad always had this alias, and he had a group of friends who always called the house, and it turned out that he was a big collector. And but his passion for it, his interest level in it, his sort of trying to teach us what he loves really kind of rubbed off on me. And he sort of flagged me to some cool stuff happening in the industry. I started to do some more diligence and research on it. And I thought there was a pretty cool thing to be had here. And I really applied my knowledge of, everything to do with the financial markets that I learned on Wall Street with my background in sports entrepreneurship. And I went to work. And that was sort of the, sort of partly how Collectible was grown to be where it is today.
Of course. And just on the subject of your background in sports entrepreneurship, I heard you had an involvement with a minor league football team. I'd love to just hear a little bit about your experience with that. And, you can explain it, of course.
Yeah, I co-founded a minor league football league. I almost wouldn't even consider it a minor league football league. I think what we realized was there was a really interesting opportunity. Right? So if you think about the business of minor league football, I think a lot of people probably in sports business would say that being in a minor league football business is literally one of the worst businesses you could possibly think of. Right? I mean, when you think about football in general, football is a really cost-intensive sport and really expensive to operate a league. There's all sorts of expenses. But what we recognized was there were a lot of leagues which had tried and failed and raised a lot of money and tried and failed. There was the Alliance of American Football, there was the XFL, there was the USFL. There were a lot of these leagues that tried and failed. It seems like there was some demand for it. I think people generally liked it, but for whatever reasons, they couldn't financially support themselves. And what happened was it created this massive void in the professional football world, where if you're on a 52-man roster with the NFL, or if you were on, sort of the practice squad, if you will, you had an opportunity, right? But there was, thousands upon thousands of athletes who were on the fringe, who had nowhere to go, who had nowhere to play, and no way to gain additional exposure. So what we recognized was that there was a need for players to get additional exposure. There was a need for teams to have additional showcases where they could, scout and identify talent. And that was sort of a vacuum in the sports world. We literally studied the business models of professional sports and minor league leagues and said, how can we literally turn this model on its head, right? How can we do what the world needed, right? What all parties wanted, but do it in a sustainable, cost-efficient way. Right? So we literally looked at every line of the business model and said, what are the major expenses? How can we reduce them? And in some cases, how can we turn expenses into revenue opportunities? Right, so we essentially created what's called the Spring League,